Stephen A. wanted Max for very specific reasons. Now, I'm going to say these reasons, and everybody's going to have a reaction. He wanted Max first because he was white. He wanted Max second because he was intelligent. He wanted Max third because Max can speak on all things.
Former ESPN and Fox Sports host Marcellus Wiley let us in on the beef between Stephen A. Smith and Max Kellerman.
Stephen A.'s first take, the show wanted Max to speak for white America. That's that balancing act. You remember that model? It still exists, but it was really the model. Black, white, all right? Now, it's not just Max speak for white America, but that would allow Stephen A., you know, brother, get to speak for black America. Stephen A., the entertainer, had to meet Max Kellerman, the educator.
There's a lot to get to. Let's start here.
He started to realize he was getting outshined in those conversations. Outshined for these reasons, and I know these reasons. Because Max Kellerman is not only a historian, he has a degree in history from Columbia University, same school I went to, Ivy League school. But the dude is a bona fide genius.
Which we know from his days in broadcasting and how he paints the picture of the sports landscape more.
I think that Stephen A., because he gave him that opportunity, as you know, Stephen A., when he give you opportunity, he also going to say, hey, you know, you my subordinate. You stay in your lane. I hooked you up. I got you. Stay there. Max wasn't going to stay there.
Now, this is a huge anecdote. The fact that Marcellus Wiley alleges, and he does have firsthand knowledge in a lot of these situations in sports media, having been in those buildings, that Stephen A. Smith demanded Max Kellerman play his role, which led to more, let's say, difficult times onward.
This all started from a guy who was so intelligent, it brought back some of those insecurities from Stephen A. And a guy who would not back down on those issues and actually outshine Stephen A. in the same issues that he wanted to conquer so that he could not only be the king, but also the voice of the people.
When this happened, Wiley says Kellerman started to box himself in. This next part also incredibly revealing.
And I told Max this. I was like, dog, you ain't standing as tall as you used to. You ain't shining as bright as you used to. It's cracking, dog. They're not letting you do it. And he was like, dog, that's resistance up there.
Wiley then pivots to how Kellerman was treated not just on air, but off air as well.
Stephen A. was starting to act out how he didn't like how Max was winning those conversations, how Max was not going with the flow. And then he makes comments like this. You need to do what you need to do or else I'm going to get someone else. You know what he needed Max Kellerman to do? Is to be a head-nodding white guy.
Obviously, as we have covered, Kellerman rightfully did not take on this role. And per Wiley, it left Stephen A. Smith incredibly frustrated. Then Wiley spoke on Smith's continued bashing of Kellerman with his most recent appearance on Joe Budden's show.
Why is Stephen A. overcompensating like this? This is years later. Why is this classic insecurity on display still? It's okay, Stephen A. You ain't perfect, bro. You just the man right now, but you ain't perfect. Stephen A. felt threatened, point blank. There ain't no way around it.
See, now this I agree with, and I actually said this in a separate piece, that it really felt like Stephen A. Smith knew that he was being outshined, and he was ticked. And I'll relate it to this. Skip Bayless gave Shannon Sharpe that chair across from him, the same way Stephen A. Smith did for Max Kellerman. And what happened? The newcomer outshined the master. And those elder statesmen in sports media, respectively, were peeved at, in their mind, it's not true, but in their mind, the monster they created. And then they were pushed out, which is pretty interesting, isn't it? Stephen A. Smith said Shannon Sharpe was pushed out, and he gave him a ton of time to speak his truth, and then even went to bat for him on Joe Budden's podcast, yet he didn't keep that same energy for Max Kellerman, who he pushed out. When Terrell Owens said this...
So what he wanted was transparency, for people to see the full workout, to see the full Colin Kaepernick. Again, you mentioned obviously Max is going to get in here, and like I said, I'm in the streets. Max almost seems blacker than you, Stephen A. with what he's coming, you know, with his commentary.
T.O. says, and T.O.'s right, he sounds blacker than you. Why is T.O. right? because you proved he was right. One, you took T.O.'s comments so seriously that you got out of character with T.O. Two, you got out of character with your partner. Three, you still talking about that, and it still gets to you because it got to you.
And on Stephen A's line here,
you weren't an athlete and you weren't a journalist. And the absence of the two components left people wondering, why should we listen to you? It was like I was damn near doing the show by myself because we were oceans apart in terms of cachet.
Wiley would give more inside baseball.
Why the hell was I ear hustling hearing you and them on the phone trying to beg him to come to New York to do the show? Did Max all of a sudden stop playing football that day? When was Max ever a traditional journalist, even though he did his work? He put in work, dog.
He did put in the work. He put in the groundwork years and years and years from when he was a teenager on public access television in New York. We've covered this as well. To working his way from ESPN, Fox Sports, working in Los Angeles, working in New York, going wherever the job called for, covering any topic he had to, and bringing that history that he knows so well and has such a firm grasp on to each topic when it was called for, but also the insights and logic that were needed to not only relate to the sports fan, but also not come off as an actor. Stephen A. Smith has said that he wants to be an actor as well. He owned up at one point, and we covered this as well, that he admitted to Molly Qerim that it's all an act. And they're doing it for ratings. Okay. What is the counter to that when someone sees an artificial subject? Truthfulness. Honesty. It wasn't necessarily that Max was going out of his way, in my opinion, to dump on Stephen A. It's that these were just what seems like obvious positions to take. From the summer protests to the NFL protests and everything in between and afterward. And so what I see is, as Marcellus said, Max he hasn't said anything. He doesn't have to say anything because he's going to get paid until the end of next year. There's no need. What I might see in the future is Stephen A., because he clearly wants to keep talking about this. And it shows, I agree with Marcellus, his insecurities on the subject. What he could do later on in life is produce a short series or documentary, or someone will, on this tension. I don't know how many people would watch, but clearly, every time Smith brings this up, people do pay attention, and they are interested. Mainly because they know where Smith is coming from, and they know where Max is coming from.